I always tell people that it's the work that almost solely to do with you, David, that has protected the Australian waters, and that when you buy seafood in Australia, you're actually buying fish that's been well managed. There is plenty of fish here in Australia.
The other tragic reality is that 70% of the fish Australians consume is imported.
From where?
From all over. Countries arguably that are not doing as good a job with their fisheries management and protection of oceans.
Hi, welcome to Integration, where we explore the arts of moving forward, not just sustaining, but transforming. The great ones among us don't see setbacks, only the landscape of possibility before them. My guests have learned to navigate what is, which is what inspires me, to find ways to keep going and leave the world better than they found it. When the storm comes, they don't just endure, they lean into it. I hope you enjoy my guest today. Hello and welcome. Today, I'm going to be interviewing the wonderful David Carter. I'm going to read you a little bit of a blurb because he's kind of extraordinary. I'm very pleased to have him on. It's been hard to get to get in the time-wise. David has dedicated over 4 decades to the fishing industry, championing sustainable, science-based fisheries management. As the CEO of Austral Fisheries, he has led groundbreaking initiatives, including achieving Marine Stewardship Council certifications, eradicating illegal Patagonian toothfish, poaching, and I have to say that was a delicious fish. I used to grow up on it, and making Austral the world's first carbon neutral seafood company. His industry leadership has earned him recognition in the National Seafood Industry Hall of Fame and the Marine Stewardship Council's Lifetime Achievement Award. Now that's all the awards. Now we get down to the nitty-gritty of David himself. Now, I met David in a networking event because I had also done some crazy things and gone off with a bunch of entrepreneurs called the Unstoppables into the Amazon rainforest, which was extraordinary. Swimming with piranha, crocodiles, fishing for them, pink dolphins in the black water. Everything about it was extraordinary. It was an extraordinary trip. And when I came back, the networking thing of the Unstoppables was that we met the previous posse that had gone to the Antarctic, which is where I met David, who had gone down to the Antarctic expedition. Would you like to say anything about that experience?
That was the I think the Antarctic one I did was the inaugural Unstoppables adventure, and like you, extraordinary, life changing. The byline, as you know, is extraordinary people, extraordinary places, extraordinary outcomes, and kudos to Julio for conspiring or inspiring to put it all together. And that I think that gig was 100 or so guests, all sort of curated, picked social and other entrepreneurs, startups, and experience, and amazing things happened out of that. I did one. I didn't do the Amazon one with you, of course, but there was a smaller group of us went to Kenya.
Oh, you did do the African one. Yeah, I looked at it.
And that was a different experience, but also really very special.
Oh, yeah, great. So now my real interest in David actually comes from his conservation work in the ocean space as a commercial fisherman, because I think a lot of people would only be seeing the media about the unbelievably bad fishing that's going on in other parts of the world. So we're meeting a genuine ethical fisherman here that has a long-standing company that has, through his work with, why don't you talk about what other things you have enjoyed doing the most and where you've had the most success?
We'll get this on track, don't you worry. For listeners, I think you're right. Tragically, the reputation of commercial fishing's been damaged, tarnished, and the Australian practices are generally really good. I think what distinguishes Australia apart and what does account for really best practice fisheries management is the recognition that, at least in an administrative or jurisdictional sense, strong property rights are at the key. So we are blessed in Australia to have most jurisdictions. So it's complicated by our federation, but in the Commonwealth where we operate, strong property rights are the very foundation of what keeps us all on track. And so if you think about that in relation to your land, if you're a farmer or a householder, owning that land is really a really different prospect than being the tenant. And so again, in fisheries, if you own, and we have rights in perpetuity for accessing the fisheries that we're involved in, then it aligns our self-interest. So clearly we want long-term
fish supply.
viable ecosystems. It aligns our self-interest with the expectations of the community. So the community also expect that we're not going to bugger it up, that it's there for the long term. And I think that's a really important distinction to make for those that are not close to the fish, to the principles of commercial fishing.
Can I ask, because I understood that all countries in the world, the country itself, the nation, owned the ocean up to about 2 kilometres off the coast.
200 nautical miles is
200
our
nautical miles.
economic zone.
And so is that what you're referring to? I mean, most fish are in the shallow waters, aren't they? Shallower waters.
Generally, it's the continental shelf areas. Those are the shallower margins around countries is where most of the productivity is, and 200 mile exclusive economic zone is pretty significant. So in the case of Australia, we actually have the world, because of our territories and our external territories, we've got the world's third largest marine jurisdiction, some 8 million square kilometres.
Wow.
And that compares to our terrestrial footprint of around 7 million square kilometres.
Wow.
So our open estate is vast. And a fun fact for you, Sam, is which countries have the first and second biggest marine jurisdiction or exclusive economic zone?
I suppose I would have thought somewhere out near the Arctic Circle.
Pick a country that owns.
Well, I can't say Africa because Africa's lots of countries. So Japan's too small. Saudi Arabia.
No.
Too many countries. No, I'm not going to get it.
France.
The US, okay.
So you think about all of their external territories, and then, of course, France and her colonies through the Indian and the Atlantic Oceans. So the actual French marine territories are quite small, but it's the external territories that account for
lots of islands.
Even more area than Australia's.
Wow, I didn't realise that. I should look it up. That is a fun fact. So, yeah, I think the thing that I'm seeing the most in the media are the big trawlers, particularly the graphic showing that these nets that are trawling are like so many sizes of the Eiffel Tower or a Boeing jet, or like the graphic shows that they're so big. Like I just had no idea they were that big, and the amount of damage they're doing. Because when you think of the ocean, you think, well, it's a pretty big space to pulling fish from. And obviously it's awful the way they do it. But I'm just curious what your take is on all of that.
Yeah, I think it's again really easy to oversimplify those things. What we do know is that if we back it up for a second, stats on this are a bit loose, but oceans provide the world with in the order of 15 or 20% of animal protein. And there are some who believe the oceans should not be fished commercially. I think that the argument there is it's a bit selective. So if you're an oceans activist, then that's where you're going to think. But if you want to replace the animal protein that comes from the oceans with, say, terrestrial ruminants from sheep and cattle, expect to clear most of the Amazon rainforest to make room for grazing country.
Yeah, look, I've got all sorts of viewpoints about this because actually I listened to a podcast from an investor in the ocean space recently on Colin Van Sidgen's Investing in Regenerative Agriculture podcast. He had some pretty full-on stats that actually the ocean was now certainly sea life that is farmed, which is a very recent explosion of farmed ocean sea life, was now up to 50% of the global protein supply. That's not including wild. That's farmed only.
Yeah, that's true. So just let me finish my thread there. So if we say, I think marine protein and from wild fisheries still makes a significant contribution to global nutrition. It is extraordinary food. So if you think wild fisheries are producing really the equivalent of organic and free range, that
if the water weren't so dirty in places.
Yeah, in fact, and we operate uniquely within fully functioning ecosystems. So when this is done well, these ecosystems are viable and fully functioning. And so again, if we're looking at best practice, the management arrangements need to science the heck out of the target species. And so whatever it is we're chasing, and we need to understand how fast they grow, where they move, how quick they die naturally, what predators are relying on them. And then there's another whole branch of science that needs to understand the impact that the operation itself has on the on the ecosystems. So you want to preserve ecosystem function. And then to secure, say, MSC certification, you need those two, plus you need a governance arrangements that are able to monitor and respond. I think they're really good guideposts. But if you look at wild capture fisheries, then we do that without freshwater. There's no pesticides, no herbicides.
Well, unless they're coming off the land, though. Isn't that the problem? It's the agricultural runoff?
There's no inputs that involve chemicals, hormones. The other terrestrial animal production is based on a whole bunch of inputs that we don't need in wild capture fisheries. And the interesting contradiction is when people talk about trawl, and it's also very limited, very effective in terms of its emissions intensity. Wild capture fisheries are more than competitive, and some are exceptionally competitive with the best of terrestrial animal production. I think chicken meat's at 4 kilos of CO2 per kilo of production. Beef sitting at around 30 kilos of CO2 per kilo of production. Some of these fisheries are well under that. And
so just to hold you on to the point on that one, because I don't know much about the emissions of a shipping trawler. I only really know about shipping, as in the terrible sludge, those big shipping containers that across the planet are about, and how bad that stuff is that's in the atmosphere, and the carbon.
Heavy fuels,
yeah, which I'm sure you don't use in your system at all. So what are you using?
Tractors is the same as
just normal diesel. So that's fairly low comparatively, and theoretically you could be making it from a plant-based thing.
There's another whole debate about that.
If you wanted to. I don't know enough about it, but I know there's talk about doing that.
Yeah, so biodiesels, and we've done a bit of work on that. They're quite generally viable drop-ins, but we've still got a significant cost issue. So again, I think the other bit with trawl, and trawl's topical off the back of the Attenborough Oceans movie, and I'd argue that trawl can be extremely efficient. So if we, again, on this emissions intensity sort of scale.
But if we're not looking at emissions, we're just looking at ecosystems, that's more the issue, isn't it? Because it captures everything.
Really? Well, I might offend your farming sensibilities at this point, but it's interesting to note that when you show folks pictures of, say, cropping country, those beautiful rolling green hillsides.
I know how bad the cropping is, don't worry.
That's really aesthetic, and it's beautiful. And then you show them a picture of a trawl that might be impacting 5% of a bottom, and it's generally soft bottoms or sandy bottoms where there's no structure or reef, because that's bad for the gear. You don't want to tow gear through
coral
because you lose it. So it's this really interesting contradiction and sort of the framing that people have. So yes, there's all sorts of things that we need to do in trawl that make sure that interaction with bycatch species is minimised. And
yeah, why can't they that's something I've never understood. I mean, surely there's technology around now. If you don't want half the stuff, why are you catching it? Why is there no way of sifting it?
That is because it's a gear type that's not easily selected. So in a prawn trawl, we can put in, or in some of these other fish trawls, you can put in grids, and we use so-called turtle excluder devices that will eliminate large animals. So anything sort of bigger than whatever the bar spacing is, they are eliminated. We've also got bycatch reduction devices, which are responding to or recognising swimming fish behaviour, so that you've got little areas of low pressure that fish will line up and then swim out of the net. But like every species that you encounter, if you're looking to exclude that, then that becomes a wicked problem. So yes, bycatch is an issue, but again, it's just too easy to generalise. So there's bottom trawls and midwater trawls.
Is there not? I suppose the thing I think about with it is, there not some way when it comes out of the water, it doesn't have to be dead yet. A lot of it would be live. Surely a lot of it can be sourced and survived being taken out of the water and going back in.
Yep, dead right. So we've got.
They never show that in the photographs. That's why
so we've got hopper systems that allow swimming fish to stay in salt water, and then they swim up and they put over the side. But I think the other thing to realise with trawl is that, and you touched on the MSC program, Sam. So that's the Marine Stewardship Council. What's telling, and I think that's still the preeminent third-party certification standard for sustainable fisheries, and that claim is around sustainable fisheries. And it's interesting to note that of their program, which is now covers nearly 20% of global fisheries, 1/3 of that is certified trawl fisheries. So I think that that tells you volumes about how dangerous it is to generalise.
Okay, let's go on to, because next week, or is it a bit later? No, I think it's next week. I'm interviewing a guy from Seatopia that I listened to that they do tremendous testing on residue in the seafood. Or farmed fish or whatever it is that they're selling. And they decided, because I think the story was that his wife was pregnant and there were all these toxins and stuff that were being reported, and so they now do tremendous toxin testing. Now, one of the supplies that they had was salmon, and because I happened to go to a shop here in Melbourne, and I said they were selling their salmon as organic salmon from New Zealand. So I rang about 5 salmon fisheries in New Zealand. They all said there's no such thing as organic salmon, and that was a lie. And I went, okay. They said, we don't do it. Anyway, I kept ringing. They said, what? I said, but it's so good, this salmon. It's like extraordinary. It's better than any other salmon I've had. And they said, it's probably a different species.
It would be a king salmon, yeah.
So anyway, I then looked up what Seatopia are doing, which was King Ora, which is New Zealand King Ora, and they had the most produced bit of film I've ever seen. But when they get to the 2 critical things that I wanted to know, they gloss over it. Like they said, the fish food, and they just showed you a handful of pellets. Well, what's in them? That's the most important part of the entire seafood thing, is what's in them. Do they have antibiotics in them? What are they making it out of? Et cetera, et cetera. Like, to me, that's critical, because that's what's causing the pollution in the water. And then they said, and we clean the nets. Okay, they had a shot of them spraying them. So all whatever was in the net is just going back out into the water again. So I thought neither of those 2 critical points were covered in any way in the video. On and on. It must have been 25 minutes, this thing. And the only thing I wanted it to show me, which was the food source for the fish, which is what you're eating, was not covered. So I wondered if you had a viewpoint about this, because we're getting a lot of stuff at the moment because of JBS buying the salmon fisheries in Tasmania. And the locals have got, the fish are dying. There's so much pollution, and the fisheries themselves, from what I understand, are not viable, which is why they cut quarters so much, because they're not making a buck out of it. I mean, we're not talking JBS in terms of ethics here, but I know the Australian government had China or JBS to choose from. So what are we going to get at the end of the day? And the EPA is doing nothing about it, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I thought, I know nothing about this. This is just what I'm getting from the press and the local people making a fuss and standing up to the politicians. You will know about this subject. Okay,
so just to full disclosure,
yes,
we do make a distinction between wild capture fisheries and aquaculture. So they're a bit like Catholics and Protestants, really. So I have
You only do wild caught? You only do wild caught?
I think you have to be pure. Like some time ago, my previous masters, when we looked at getting into aquaculture as a diversification from wild capture fisheries, they were brave enough to say you can't do both. You can't. It is essentially sort of run with the hare and hunt with the hounds, because there's a whole different set of skills. So as hunter-gatherers, our specializations are around living in natural systems, understanding the science that underpins productivity, rolling with the seasons that allow us to deliver what nature and God provide, and then in a market sense, selling the virtues of that, all of that free range patter that you heard me run before. Now in aquaculture, it's a whole different set of risks and thinking. So say a salmon farmer, he's got 2 years from egg to harvest, basically. And he's managing all sorts of different disease pressures. They can have sudden mortality events, water temperatures. We know Tassie's sitting in the very edge of temperature tolerance for Atlantic salmon, which is an introduced species, by the way.
Yeah.
Bit like cows, Samantha.
I know.
I judge not.
You don't eat meat? You only eat fish?
No, of course I eat meat.
I don't know.
I don't eat cucumber. How's that? So the salmon guys are they've created a big business there, and the the debate in Tassie is really sort of an interest for me as an observer, an interesting exercise in social license. I think the industries has played a bit fast and loose, and so you've got a significant part of the Tassie community, indeed the Australian community, who are wondering how some of these ill will has festered. Like all those things, there's a bit of smoke, there's going to be some fire, right? But feed, sort of feed that's used, some of the animal husbandry work, the animal welfare issues, and disease management are all sort of daily challenges for those producers.
Well, I started looking into this area, the farmed fish area, back in 1999. That's how long I've been looking at it. So I went to all the organic conferences and I knew a lot about the grazing. It wasn't much interesting to me about it. I mean, sure, most of the people I know, or the few people I know in the ocean space, most of the people that I know are in the grazing space. So kind of know a lot about grazing. And after a while, when I don't grow anything, that gets a bit boring for me. In 99, I started looking at this. I was fascinated because there was tiny plenaries. And when I say tiny, I mean 4 people sitting in them. And I was one of them, fascinated. And so they were studying how the fish moved, how many fish in a pen before the animals got sick, how they lived in all these different situations. So they were doing a lot of science, and the science on it was really in these tiny little, I'm talking to this scientist and he's talking back. Like it just wasn't getting out into the wider. I don't know now how much of it's all shared. I'm sure as it's 50% of ocean protein, I'm sure it's big business and lots of science going on because those gross mortality events are pretty terrible. Now, I did speak briefly about someone, Neil, before we got talking. And one of the things that he did when I was in COP was to look at a demonstration site that they were doing. And he was talking about like the integration of mangroves and basically creating a wild nursery in an environmental situation that produced healthy shrimp and tilapia or whatever. So as a food source. So he was looking at it from a food source and creating biodiesel and a full watering system, filtration and carbon and like everything. It was a really great demonstration site. I was really impressed by it. But he, in that presentation, spoke about the vast amount of death and disease that these shrimp factories producing in farmed shrimp were having. Like it was like 90% of the fish, of the shrimp died. And I thought that means that most of them is just terrible not good for business, but also terrible for human consumption because that means we're eating disease. So I became aware of this. There was a woman called Twyla, gone blank on her name. She actually passed away, but she did a very extensive documentary called The Fish Documentary about the salmon, the wild Atlantic salmon being affected by the farmed fish. And so you're in a crossover point because you're doing wild, but I would think your wild fish are being affected by the pollution and the effect of the farmed fishing pollution that is in the water with so much of it because it's much bigger than people realize. It
doesn't directly impact us. Say in the prawn context, some of the challenges are relating to diseases. So under in particular in prawn farming in particular is a white spot syndrome virus, which is not a happy place for a prawn. And there's some strict biosecurity requirements. And we have had outbreaks in farms in Queensland where the entire crop has been nuked. I think they dropped formaldehyde or something nasty in there to take them all out.
Water.
Into the ponds just to a bit like bird flu.
They're not in, are they in land situation? I mean, is that water going back out?
These are ponds.
Landlocked. They are landlocked.
But really, it's sort of that same sort of biosecurity response we have seen with bird flu, right? And but the risk for that, the risk is that under stress conditions, animals become more vulnerable to some of these diseases and pathogens.
Absolutely.
And so again, if we have poor biosecurity, which allowed this virus into Australia, and once it's in a farm, it's got a risk of getting into the wild. So yes, there's some implications for that. In terms of nitrogen loads and so the result of fish waste, we have seen some of that with the debate around the Maugean skate in Macquarie Harbour, and that obviously became a very big issue in the run-up to the election, and that's jobs versus environment sort of narrative. I think certainly in those closed areas, the nitrogen load probably was too much. But again, from our particular operation, it's not something that directly impacts us. To be frank, the biggest impacts for us often are folks that might be listening to this. What they choose to flush down the toilet and wash down their drains ends up in the ocean.
Isn't it going through sewage plants?
It is, but like there's some testing that was looking at a fish mussel in species in the Barrier Reef that revealed upwards of 4,000 different man-made compounds. So this could be
Medicines, contraceptives, whatever they're taking.
Contraceptives, trace elements of that, but even small amounts of pesticides, herbicides, cleaning materials. Yeah, we've as a species, we've been very clever at making lots of different compounds that are very clever at doing the things they do. But if we're not careful with where they go, then our coasts and oceans they're an easy dumping ground.
So the EPA is not stopping that from happening. The Environmental Protection Agencies, they're not stopping the sewage runoff getting into the ocean.
Again, they're really difficult compounds to extract.
So people are dumping what they can't get rid of. I do understand that there are actual medicines that have been made now by man that have got an opposite twist to the DNA spiral. Like they're so unique, nature has no way of addressing them at this point.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's plenty of those, and we know. So particularly with prawns, for example, they have an early juvenile phase that sees them in estuaries in particular. So if some of these it's insecticides, because insects and prawns all belong to the same
species. Do you know?
Suborder families anyway, but they're engineered to be quite lethal for insects. Also in very small quantities can have a dire impact on baby prawns. And again, some parts of the East Coast adjacent to the Barrier Reef have been adversely affected. So I think it's just easy to sort of point to industry, but every one of us as consumers are having an impact and playing a role here.
I'm not to say that we're not, but I think that it's unfair to dump it on the humans who don't know that. Like somebody that, like me, that researches all the time, I might go have a look at what I'm using and I make sure I use everything natural. But I know that that's very...
I would suggest you're an outlier, Sam.
Absolutely. But my point is I've also looked at the cost of it and it's very, very expensive. So to use, like, for instance, even the word perfume or parfum, which is on pretty much everything, is highly toxic for humans and everything else. And they don't have to label what that is, that parfum, unless it's got made from an essential oil, which is a plant. It's going to be bad for the environment because it's been made in a lab. And the same thing with all of the things that you're talking about in terms of getting out into the ocean. Unless the EPA or the government body that's in charge of controlling it actually does control it, how is a human going to know that? I mean, they buy something in the supermarket, they expect it's past some sort of regulatory... We've got so many rules. I mean, we live by so many rules. So hard to get anything anywhere. And you'd hope that part of it was, which we're now realising it's not at all, and those various chemical companies have got, their fingers in every pie. And I think I watched a documentary on DuPont and M3 or something, which made Teflon in the 50s. And that chemical that is used to make the Teflon, not so much the Teflon itself, creates a C that's 8 parts of carbon. And that's in every part of the planet now. Every animal, every plant, every mote of water, and that can be traced back to 2 companies. And it's phenomenally dangerous in any sort of toxic level.
Yep. No, I think you're right. But I'd also say, the regulatory systems are not perfect, and they can be captured by
Lobbyists?
Not lobbyists, or just it could be industry, like a Monsanto. But we've, as a society, again, we've got some wicked trade-offs to make. The much maligned use of glyphosate in broadacre cropping. Now we imagine life for a crop or a wheat farmer without glyphosate, and we've got
be done. Don't you worry, it can be done.
But we've still got a much more expensive production system. So are consumers ready to pay more for their food? And I'd argue not just in a fisheries context, Sam, but this is a much bigger issue. Our food producers are the primary custodians of majority of this country's natural capital. It's our food producers who are on the front line of the physical and policy consequences of climate change. It's our food producers.
Hence why I've been trying to get carbon going, to give them a supplementary income that pays them for that stewardship rather than what they currently got, which is just they're just market takers for whatever they produce. Of course, they've got to do it as cheap as they can.
But it's our food producers who are also currently, at least, not receiving a risk-adjusted return for the products they produce.
Not at all.
I would argue that there's a number of sectors of the Australian food production system for whom the days are numbered. It's like, how long can they continue to put up with it? So with making losses, and then what are the consequences for us as a society when we can't feed ourselves?
No food?
We no longer have food security.
Exactly.
And some of this also gets tangled up with, again, we're wandering off base maybe, but
Well, we're not, because we're going to get back to the point that this is all about, because really at the end of the day, you're talking about survival, and we're talking about financial survival as a business because of various factors. And how do you get through that? Regulatory factors, or cost being driven down, or markets adjusting to this, that, the other. I mean, somewhere along the line, it would seem to me, I mean, you've got your principles and then you've got to just put food on the table. So I do understand those are two warring factors. But many of the people that I've spoken to have come up against that and decided they just couldn't live with themselves if they didn't work towards that stewardship thing, because their children will have no food. Because the stewardship, I mean, it's a pretty critical line to keep destroying an environment to be able to feed yourself and your family today or even the next 10, 15 years, and there's nothing there in 50 years. Yeah, and it can't recover.
The brutal truth is you can't be green if you're in the red. You got to be in the black to be green. And
I do appreciate that. I do.
We see the citizens of Gaza. They can't think past the next aid truck. Now, I have been in a privileged position where we've enjoyed fairly consistent levels of profitability. That has allowed me to do some of the sort of future-proofing, forward-facing kind of work and brand building and position building that we have done. But if you're in a business and you're worried about where next week's payroll is coming from, you have no capacity to be thinking about what the world's going to look like in 2050.
Of course, I totally agree. And right now, there's been people who are in drought in Victoria, even though they're in flood in New South Wales, and they've been hand feeding their sheep, and they're just been hit because of the Dan Andrews pandemic thing, where we went for 2 years without being productive, and all that money got used. That's a debt that Victoria lives with, on and on. The worst lockdown of all of the states. West Australia was pretty locked down, but you were allowed to move around a bit more, I think, than us.
As a society, I think, and back to our food systems, I think a community generally do not appreciate how fragile, complex, brittle, vulnerable our food production systems are. We're having a semi-grown-up conversation about energy systems in transition, but we haven't begun talking about food systems in transition.
I got to say, as someone who's worked in the food system so long and now working in energy, because I have gotten nowhere with the food systems, again, it's about getting enough money to be able to be in a position of luxury to start saying, okay, now that we've got enough position of energy, because then if you can't turn the lights on, for most people, you can't do something. So I do think the energy thing is the focus at the moment, certainly as well, to try and bring down the emissions and the heating of the planet, etc. But I also feel the food security issue is coming fast and furious, a lot more than people realise.
Absolutely. And we could well wake up one morning and find we've got no commercial fish business, we've got no dairy business, we've got challenged horticultural businesses. And
are you seeing that in your industry, in wild fishing?
Absolutely.
You are.
So if we can't, there's sectors of the Australian fish business that are going backwards, and
because the fish are dying, the fish stock are dying.
No, the economics are not working. For all those reasons, we're dealing with I think changing climatic conditions. That's putting pressure on bottom lines. Comes at the same time as serious inflation cost pressures moving through the system. And as I said earlier, there's no the price we're receiving. Like we're paying 2025 costs, say in our prawn business, but getting 2005 prices. Now that's not sustainable. We're now looking at restructuring that industry. We've had successive years of multi-million-dollar losses, and the pressure in that system's intense, and there are other sectors of the business. And once you've got that spiral, and boats aren't properly repaired, crews aren't properly paid, the quality falls. You end up with in a market economy where people can go and create widgets or new apps or something. Why would you want to go to sea, right? Or why would you want to be a knife hand on a boning room floor? Or the kids don't necessarily want to do that sort of work. So,
could you see yourself introducing AI robots? Tesla's putting their first robot out this year.
Yeah, I think that's all on. And I had some time with my mates in the WA ag sector here. Got a lovely little group of folks who share, compare, and automation, particularly in the red meat industry or the meat industries, that's really ramping up. So the recent trade shows have shown just those pressures, global and universal, and automation in those packing, boning, handling operations are that's the buzz.
Well, I saw that even during the pandemic, where fruit was left on the ground because there was no pickers. And the irony is that labour, something you do with your hands, is going to be the only thing you're going to do when all of your widget ideas stuff, all of the tech stuff will be taken over pretty immediately by the AI. You're going to need to have labourers. The labourers will come out of the people that cannot get a job anymore in their chosen profession because it isn't needed anymore. So it's kind of an irony that will switch around again. No.
Optimists. Oh, mess.
Sorry?
I say just buy an army of Tesla optimists.
Tesla optimists.
What's the name of the Tesla robot? I think it's...
I don't know. It sounds like you're saying Optimus Prime from the Transformer movie.
Probably something like that.
So my question to you then, as someone that has sat at the head of a company that's done well, and you're now potentially facing large problems, well, not just the retirement, but also that the business itself might not be there anymore.
Oh, no, we're diverse, and these things these are ebb and flow. So I'm not overly concerned in that regard. But sorry, carry on with your question.
My question was simply, what do you do to face or give yourself resilience to keep going? You've obviously survived a long time of these ebbs and flows, and stresses would be extreme at times. And yet, how have you? What grounds you? What brings you back to being able to keep going?
Yeah, I think it's still We're having to pay attention to some of the climate forecasts. So there's a fair bit of energy and some really good work going in from a number of people around what fisheries will look like come 2040 and 2050. And there will be quite a few losers. There will be some winners.
Because of those licenses, those rights to fish in certain areas?
Environmental change. So some fish populations...
Oh, the fish
will be more resilient to what is to come than others.
Right.
As I said, some will potentially do better under these changing conditions. What grounds me? I think just doing the right thing, good public policy. I see, I do lament things like marine protected areas. It's kind of the dogma is that if we colour in lots of areas and we draw pretty lines on maps, that we'll all be saved, right? But it's bullshit, and it doesn't deal with the reality of our contemporary oceans. And most research, I think sort of consensus would suggest that marine species, this is really, really generalised, but we're seeing decadal shifts of 100 kilometres in marine ecosystems as those species move towards the poles. And we need to find cleverer ways to use and protect our natural resources. And rigid lines on the chart do neither. They serve neither commercial nor conservation interests in my view. So we've got work to do to think about that.
I heard there was a lot of research, pretty amazingly deep research going on out of places like Korea and Japan, but certainly Korea because they are such a fish culture. So they do a lot of work on how to renew sea moss and how to get ecosystems working. And I would think in the temperature change, that would be a big part of that research, how to navigate it.
Yeah. So there's again a lot of unknowns. We've got to monitor the heck out of that. I'd argue there's potential for us to supplement incomes in fishing operations with being ships of opportunity around data collection. So much the same way terrestrially, you're encouraging farmers to think about planting trees and getting into the carbon business. I think it's expensive to put boats and people at sea. We could be usefully looking at ways to monetize those platforms as data collectors and providing insight for more refined analysis of...
You might be interested in a guy I interviewed called Jeremy McCain, who developed a robot for that sits in the water and does all this data collection that can be, like, it's small, it's like a little buoy, and it does all the things that you would do on a ship for data collection and then sends it live. Sorry?
There's some really clever stuff around
Very
autonomous.
clever. He's pretty big on all that area. I'm kind of fascinated by all that stuff that's happening in the space. Do you think that you see yourself moving more into that scientific realm of tracking and monitoring and advising at that level if you maybe do retire out of what you're doing?
We've always done that. So I think
you spoke about retiring, so I'm asking what you think.
Yeah, I know. It's like that's the R word. Yeah, no,
just retire.
I
Do
could
nothing.
spend more time with my young grandson, see whether he's ready for 3 degrees of warming by the end of the century. So yeah, no, this is part of my DNA, and these networks, these people, these conversations. Frankly, Sam, so it'd be difficult to unplug. So yeah, who knows what the...
Well, I know that Greening Australia, which as the CEO has moved on from that, but they were doing forward planning with the BOM, the National Institute for Weather, around the plots of land that they were growing seeds to replenish areas, and they were with the predictive model of the heat moving down, and they'd already plotted out for 20 years plus where to grow, what was growing here now will be growing there. And I was wondering, are you sort of similarly looking at that from the fishing point when you say some species will do well and some won't? Are you forward thinking 20 years in of where are we going to fish for this now? Because I would imagine the fish will move. Because I did read something just 2 days ago about clownfish, the little Nemo character, had adapted to temperature change and they had reduced their biological size. They'd already evolved to changing temperatures so they didn't have to expend as much energy in the growth before they reproduced or something like that. Like it was like, oh, that's so fast.
Yeah.
They're evolving.
And some will do better than others. So some will adapt quicker, some won't make it. And yes, absolutely. What species we're fishing, where we're fishing those, they're all things that we are paying very close attention to. And as I said earlier, current evidence suggests that 100 kilometres a decade is about the rate at which these systems are moving.
Wow, that's a lot. That's 10 kilometres a year.
And some of it more like catching pelagics now off Rottnest Island here that would not be normal. Yeah, there's a lot going on. I think my personal view is 100's probably conservative.
Well, I have to say I went in the ocean this morning and it's very cold down here. I went swimming at 7:30 this morning and it was not that cold. I mean, it was cold. It was bone-chillingly cold, but it was still for, what are we up to? May 29. It was only 9 degrees outside. Like by now we'd be in seriously cold 2-3 degrees sort of vibe. And there I would not be thinking about taking my clothes off for any reason. And so I was like, it's unseasonably warm for Victoria. And you're quite a way north of me. You're in Perth, aren't you?
Yeah, 30 to 32 latitude south.
So it's what temperature is it there?
Today will be pretty mild, 15 to 22. That's close to average, but we've had a really warm by autumn.
Yeah.
We're just expecting the first decent front for the season to come through. And my farming mates now got the crops in, and they reckon this is a $1 billion front.
Wow.
Help the crops get going.
Wow, that's huge.
It's an interesting way to frame it, but the forecast is for good, long, slow, sort of soaking rain.
Wow, because I have a farmer in West Australia that I interact with. They're doing a different methodology altogether. They can grow in temperatures that everybody else can't grow in, like extraordinary what they've managed to, the biodiversity they've created in very inland, very dry, like 50 isn't unusual. So, and they're growing wheat and sheep and all that in those environments, kind of extraordinary. But they've gone and had some of their bumper crops in no rain, amazing what they're doing. But it is about learning how to adapt to the environment And we're part of the ecosystem too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, well, it's just been wonderful talking to you.
Yeah, an easy chat.
Easy chat. Always
No,
an easy chat.
You've been very gentle with me, Sam.
What do you expect? I didn't know. What should I have asked you that I didn't ask you?
No. It's like just, yeah, no, it was no hard questions at all.
I will ask you this question. What about piracy? As other countries, let's say, run out of fish in the wild caught, is that happening? And are you seeing other countries coming down more and fishing in your regions? No?
There's a little bit of artisanal Indonesian incursions in the north, shark finning and stuff, but it's relatively low level. Yeah, it does represent some biosecurity risk. But no, Australia, I think the work we did 20 odd years ago on particularly in the southern oceans, that's pretty well fixed, really. No, I'm very happy with where Australia's at with protecting our resources.
How do you do that? Is that satellite? How do you, I mean, the ocean's big.
Yeah, no, that's, satellites have become critical, but there's all sorts of other measures. So particularly for toothfish, that was a very solid campaign for us for a very long time. And it involves both on the water measures, flag state controls, port state controls, documentation of trade and catch. We have quite an elaborate market state controls, flag state controls.
I don't know what those terms mean. It's just that I did hear China came down off the coast of Perth not so long with a nuke submarine just to sort of test its ability.
They didn't catch much fish.
No, but I'm just saying the ability to come down here is not difficult if they're not being challenged. And I heard there was a lot of Chinese action going on somewhere with massive, almost on float factories floating around fishing. But I'm imagining we're not seeing that where we are.
I think China,
Argentina.
Yeah, China's certainly make its presence felt around South America, but no, we're pretty well blessed. But again, to be fair, our fisheries resources are generally quite poor. So even though we do own the world's third largest marine jurisdiction, we're well down the list in terms of fisheries output and production. Even our cousins in New Zealand do a lot better. So our fisheries are quite depauperate. We don't have any of the massive upwellings that feed fisheries like the anchoveta fishery out of Peru. And so our fish production is primarily higher value, lower volume species. So traditionally that was lobster, prawns and abalone. That's changed a little bit. So we don't have those big volume whitefish fisheries that we see in, say, the Bering Sea or in New Zealand or the North Sea.
And are they fishing their supplies out, those countries that you're referencing?
No, they're pretty good shape. The pollock guys in the Bering Sea are seeing some impact of climate change. So fish is tending to move further north.
Because it's very cold, the Bering Sea, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. No, it's really cold, but very productive. It's a 1 million ton fishery and it's been consistent. So the fishery itself's in good shape. It's got other challenges, not the least of which is they rely heavily on either factory processing vessels or shore-based processing operations along the Aleutians. And as fish move a bit further north, so you run the risk of stranding some of those assets because you've got bigger distances to travel and that changes the economics. But even in the North Sea, we've got capelin stocks that would traditionally be fished by Norway and Denmark are now being fished by Greenland and Iceland.
Well, even I'm sure in that documentary it was Newfoundland and they'd been fishing for centuries and they were, even within their own lifetime, the nets were just basically empty. So
no, they knew that cod fishery was that was a textbook study of how to do it wrong. I was just going to wave.
How to do it wrong.
Yeah, that's where politics overruled science. And I think the world's generally learned a lesson there. The cod's quietly coming back, I believe, but having removed the cod made way for, interestingly enough, commercial quantities of crab and worked out sort of okay for those guys. Yeah, we've long since demonstrated that as a species we can indeed have an impact on our what was originally thought to be
limitless stocks. Yeah. So do you feel that the science is now caught up where the global fishery, apart from the odd maverick out there that doesn't care or country that doesn't care, do you feel that the awareness of keeping that stock relative to your commercial requirements is now more commonplace? Because I just say when I was in Italy, it was just like they just eat anything for like two lira. Eat everything. There was not.
Yeah.
I was amazed. Anything could survive around them.
Yeah, I think it's a very general view, but I think first world economies are dealing with this satisfactorily. That's represented by the fact that the MSC has coverage of 20% of global wild fish production. The challenge is the 80%, and it's the 80% that's coming from developing country jurisdictions where they might know what to do, but they don't have the resources to put it in place. And so whether it's parts of Southeast Asia or Western East Africa,
it was mainly West Africa that I was hearing about, because an Australian marine scientists have been based there and saying there was just no interest from the African government to assist. In fact, they're almost
they don't have the resources, so they might license foreign fishing into their exclusive economic zones, but you can license one boat and then 3 boats turn up. You can license
no way to police it,
and they haven't got the money or the patrol boats that are capable of enforcing the rule of law, or corruption, taking backhanders for favours. So these are the problems of fisheries management. Is primarily people, not fish.
So fish supply, you would say, despite all the news that we hear about shark finning and all the devastation of various creatures and unmitigated destruction of them, you're saying it's not as bad as we think it is, and it can be actually. There is enough seafood there for the volumes that we have that we're pulling out of the ocean?
I'm not diminishing the poor practices. I lament the fact that it's poor practice that defines the rest of us, and that's the thing that pisses me off.
But we're in a fairly unique place down here. We're so far away from...
But we get tarred with the same brush, right? So you put me in the same box with all the other bad bastards.
But I don't see how we can. I always tell people that it's the work that almost solely to do with you, David, that has protected the Australian waters, and that when you buy seafood in Australia, you're actually buying fish that's been well managed.
Yep.
There is plenty of fish here in
true.
Australia.
The other tragic reality is that 70% of the fish Australians consume is imported.
From where?
From all over. Countries, arguably, that are not doing as good a job with their fisheries management and protection of ocean. So we're running another campaign which...
How can a person know that? How would you tell a listener or a punter?
So at this stage, the Australian government's in the process of requiring country of origin labelling on all seafood, which I think is a good start.
I thought that was already in, but I thought there were so many ways around it. People, they put it here and they put it there.
In supermarkets, it's not in food service, so we'd like to see that on menued as a country of origin. I think the other play is that whilst we live under all sorts of super strict rules. And we carry the costs of those, then, for example, our barramundi farmers, for example, do all the right things. They have high labour costs, high energy costs, high regulatory costs, and yet they compete unfairly with imported products that come in half price, Sam, like and you survive.
Although I have to say, as I love barramundi, that wild barramundi is I just don't eat it when it's farmed. The flavour is... Chalk and cheese, I couldn't eat it. I just don't like it. And I feel the same about trout. I think it's horrible. Farmed trout, horrible tasting stuff. I don't eat a lot of fish, but if I'm going to eat fish, whereas farmed salmon, good farmed salmon is amazing.
Yeah,
I've eaten the wild salmon and it's like, oh, it's so strong.
Oh, but that's as God intended, right? That's the good stuff. A good Canadian sockeye.
Have you eaten the really, really red one?
Yeah.
I don't know. It tastes off to me. It's so fishy.
You've been.
I've been raised on farmed fish. Absolutely. I mean, the same with the wild chicken. I wouldn't be able to eat one. I've eaten farmed chicken all my life.
Yeah.
I do know the irony.
Yeah, that's right. You've got the irony.
All right. Well, look, I think we've done a wonderful job talking for this length of time.
Yeah. Thank you. Must be lunchtime.
Definitely lunchtime or breakfast. And lovely to talk to you again. And if you have anything you'd like to say at any point, please give me a call.
It's always plenty to say, Sam.
What did you not talk about that you wanted to talk about?
Oh, God, no, that's like, no, I think we've exhausted this for now, but...
Okay. Well, if you think of another subject you'd like to talk about, they were just the things I could think of that I wanted to talk about and ask how you got through everything. So... I think you've got a roll with the punches kind of attitude.
How to eat an elephant. bite.
We're an elephant, one bite at a time. Lovely to see you
Thanks,
again.
Good work.
And have a good day.
You too.
Bye.
See you, mate.